All right, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm not a big fan of intros. I don't do bios. If you don't know what Interpol is, look it up. If you don't know who someone on the panel is, I'm sure they are findable on the LinkedIn or the Google. I've asked them each to take 2 to 4 minutes and tell you something you don't know or I don't know about what they're doing in their area. And then we will get to audience questions. So hopefully we'll give ourselves about 30 minutes, 20 minutes or so of audience questions. So please pay attention and please participate. Remember, I am a reporter. I can ask questions all day. They'd much rather hear from you. So we are unplanned. We are unrehearsed. Heather right here is to my left. Heather, turn that microphone on and let's take it away. Tell me something I don't know.
Can you hear me? All right. So I am going to stray a little bit. Interpol, for those of you who don't know, we are law enforcement who actually does not enforce the law. We are data brokers. So 200 international partners, 18,000 domestic partners, and the simple version is if one wants to play with the other, you come through us. The challenge that really we are facing is how to do that meaningfully, safely, and in adherence to all the various rules. As you might imagine, the relationship I have with CBP, who is one of our largest contributors to and consumers of Interpol data, is different than the one that I have with Interpol headquarters or our partners in the UK, and yet we all have to get the information across. As we just heard from the Intel perspective, it's all about getting the right information to the right person at the right time, yet respecting the rules that protect that. So when you architect a technology solution, you're looking at how to make the information available, because we all know if we want to keep the data safe, just don't let anyone touch it and don't let anyone have any access. I mean, that's one of the oldest thoughts we have. But as we've seen, it's not feasible in our world. So how do I take that set of rules and in a meaningful way architect a solution where I can take advantage of contemporary technology and plan for whatever you guys are thinking about that's going to show up a week after I deploy what I currently have? So from my perspective.
No, to keep the mic.
Oh.
Here we have follow-up questions.
Follow-up questions.
Follow-up questions. You kept to your 2 to 4 minutes. You were great. But when you talk about being data brokers, what does that involve? Because sharing data is always one of the most difficult things. So give me an example or give me a sense of how that works today and maybe how it can work in the future or you're hoping for it to work in the future.
So right now, we have a 24/7 command center. They get approximately 60,000 touches per month, and a touch, it can be an email, can be fax, can be a telephone call, can be snail mail. Keep in mind that there are 196 partner members in Interpol. I forget to count ourselves. And so it ranges from, at one end, the United States, the Five Eyes, the big countries out of Western Europe, and then you go to all the way to the other end of the spectrum in terms of technology, power. You're talking about countries where it's a collateral duty for one person who's lucky to have 24/7 power. Obviously, that person's capacity and capabilities different than what we expect here on our side. The way it works right now, it's very manual. It takes a lot of energy to look at information, do translation, get it into a system that is a case management capability, and then move it to the right person who can make an assessment. However, the intent and the goal, and we're ankle deep into a modernization effort, is how do you tag the data, adhering to the rules, and again, remembering that my international set of rules are going to be different than the domestic set of rules. Tag the data in such a way that I'm removing human intervention. The system should be doing as much of this as possible. There's a couple of reasons we want to do that, familiar to most of us. You reduce humans' involvement, you reduce the likelihood of human error. You reduce humans, you reduce the likelihood of human interaction, judgment calls, mistakes, something along that line. We want to make it so that we are quickly and efficiently getting the information from point A to point B. An example, one of the things we do that most people don't understand is humanitarian situations. Let's say you're playing a video game, you go into a chat room and somebody says, don't go to school tomorrow, I'm going to be there with a gun. What do? Did you know you should call 911? Because 911 can get a hold of Interpol, where we work with the game provider, the ISPs, and we have literally been able to coordinate activity where someone knocks on a door in a different country just before something goes terribly wrong. We need to get that information obviously very quickly to where it needs to go in the right capacity. That's a little different than, here's a set of information collected by an entity who won't be named. that gets into a system, and we didn't kill the son of a bitch on the battlefield, but we want to get him when he tries to cross a border with a false passport, because we don't want him coming into a new country. And apologies, gentlemen, 99% of the time it's a him. They cross the border, and we don't want that sort of damage coming into a new country. So how do we get that information safely and securely and quickly to CBP? Because this person got on an airplane 6 hours ago and lands at JFK in 5 minutes, and we want CBP and their partners to make it happen.
All right, excellent. Thank you for sharing. Edom?
Edom.
Edom, I was one of the two. Edom from TSA.
It's a 50-50 shot half the time. So my name is Edom Cologne, and that long little bio there, it's just, I work for TSA. Pretty straightforward, 3-letter agency, easy one. So one of the things that people might not realize with TSA is that we operate in anything that moves within the United States, right? People most of the time think TSA is at the airports, but you got your pipeline, you got your railways, you got the buses. Everything that moves is transportation. And that's where we have oversight over and try to secure it for the traveling public to the best of our degree. Our biggest presence is obviously the airports. We all know why. It's coming up here very soon, an unfortunate anniversary, right? But what we also have that most people don't realize is a pretty significant law enforcement presence. Our federal air marshals is our biggest public facing, if you will, but not really public because you don't see them, presence. But we also have our Tiger teams. We have a criminal investigation department inside TSA. So we do a lot of collaborations with other agencies like CBP, ICE, which we'll maybe talk about a little later, and kind of work on building that communication. So that's one of the things that maybe most people don't realize is how robust TSA's mission is across the United States and how we do have a pretty significant law enforcement presence that most people don't realize. And it's not the officers at the checkpoint. They're not the law enforcement. They're just security at the checkpoints. But there is actually a arm of the TSA that is considered law enforcement agency.
All right. So let's do a quick follow-up since we're talking cybersecurity, and you have the title of acting CIO, among other titles. Where does the cyber role fit in when you talk about oversight over transportation? We know there's critical infrastructure sectors. We know transportation has been a big area of focus, pipelines and the like. Talk a little bit about the cyber role that your office plays and how you help protect, prepare. You fill in the adjective.
So I just want to clarify, I'm not the acting CIO. I am the acting executive advisor to the CIO. CIO
should be the acting CIO.
No.
Yemi will get upset on that.
Yeah, Yemi will correct that, or Kristen, one of the two. So one of the things that we do have oversight with the surface, we have a whole, in TSA, we actually have kind of two sections that deal with cyber and IT. We have what I consider to be more of our internal airport operations, where actually TSA has hold, which is where the office of the CIO works on. That's the office that I work on. We deal a lot with the internal cybersecurity. There is an entire separate division called Surface Operations and the Operation Support, and they deal with the regulatory entities of surface, pipeline, the energy sectors, things like anything, well, not energy sector, that's the Department of Energy, but other transportation groups. And what we're doing right now is trying to define for them what we expect them to do on a cybersecurity and regulatory entity. So they are conducting self-evaluations using the same requirements that we have internally to tell us what are they doing to secure their infrastructure? How are they meeting cybersecurity requirements? How are they improving their security posture to prevent something like the Colonial Pipeline incident that happened a couple of years ago? Right, so how do we get to that level? A lot of it at the moment is still being built up because while we did have a large presence of internal cybersecurity evaluations, we only recently started to increase our capacity to regulate and oversee the surface and pipelines and other travel industry security posture.
All right, thank you very much. Pete.
Well, sorry.
I think you're on.
Well, I learned a new word, inestable, right, Tom? Is that I wrote it down? So is that correct? I think it's a compliment. So what's new is old in my world. I retired from the FBI, worked counterintelligence most of my career, espionage, and insider threat. And when we think about the cyber challenges, I think I have to make sure that we keep in mind that there's a human being behind that computer. Whether they're in Russia, whether they're in their mother's basement, whether they're in Jersey, or whether they're in working for our own government that we've trusted and we've given them the keys to our kingdom. And then at some point in time, perhaps some of them, unfortunately, and in my claim to fame, it was a woman who committed espionage that we put in jail. So there's one. But at the same time, we have to think about cyber challenges and keep in mind that there are human beings who are operating these computers, whether they're in foreign countries or here in the United States, and we've entrusted them. That's something that we have to keep on the focus of. We look at, when we look at insider threat, we think of Teixeira, a recent case. He introduced a new word to me, Discord. What the hell is Discord? I had never even heard of this. I'm 54 years old. I'm not a gamer. So we're understanding and learning that there is new ways of committing espionage, of new ways of committing unauthorized disclosures. And that is, in fact, quite frankly, a cyber challenge. The espionage aspect of things, state sponsorship, we looked at, where Iran recently was attributed to doing a cyber attack against the Trump campaign. That's a big deal. And when the government comes out and actually makes an attribution, that is in and of itself a big deal. These are challenges that we all have to face in terms of nation states and making sure that we're keeping that in the forefront of our minds as we move forward with increasing the technology capabilities that we have both in the IC and in law enforcement.
All right. Pete, one quick follow-up, because you bring up the ever-changing threat. From your perspective, and you're, as you mentioned, retired FBI, what's the challenge that you see, whether it's Interpol or TSA or whomever, keeping up with that changing threat? This idea of hey, what the hell's Discord? I learned a new word. Tomorrow it's going to be something else. What is happening to keep up with that threat and understanding where that threat could be coming from?
Well, I appreciate Dr. Merritt talking about the operational technology division at the FBI. San Bernardino, the attack in San Bernardino, there was an Apple phone of the two shooters that Apple, and all full disclosure, this is an Apple phone, Apple wouldn't let the FBI get into their computer or into their phone, even with a court order. And even with the Trump shooter, I think the FBI had a hard time getting into the Apple phone, but they've had to creatively find alternative ways to get into commercially available phones and things that we all have access to that are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. Most of us probably have an Apple phone. These challenges, these technology challenges are going to continue for law enforcement. How do we get into things? And then how do we counter things? You look at the Idaho shooting where there were 4 people that were murdered. Technology solved that case, identified that suspect. The Ring cameras in that neighborhood, the technology that you can buy on Amazon, identified the car that then the license plate reader indicated was attached to the white car that became the breakthrough that we needed to identify who did this tragic event. Technology is going to be with us forever, and law enforcement's challenge is keeping up with that to a degree where we have enough talent that we've hired inside that has those skills or have those relationships with folks either in this country or around the world perhaps that we can trust to help us do things that, complex challenges like breaking into an iPhone. True.
Tom, do we have Tim from Defense Acquisition University? All right. Does Tim need a second, or should I go through the panel?
Well,
there you are.
Start? I'm here.
We can't hear him, though.
Sorry, I know this looks kind of scary up there.
And we can't hear him, so we will try to figure that out. And,
okay, you can't hear me? Okay.
Over Tom. Did we got you now?
Can you hear me now?
Hey.
Whoa, yes. No, I look kind of scary over there, but sorry about that. Thank you guys for letting me be joined virtually. I have a boot on my foot, so it would be hard for me to get in the airport, I think. But just real quickly, I'll make it fast. I got a chance to go to NATO back in November, actually in September, and help them writing policy for zero trust. And I actually feel like I helped a lot, but don't get too impressed. It wasn't so much because I was had this amazing knowledge. It was because, English is my first language. Some people might say, well, Southern English, but anyway, we won't go there. But I am very, very thankful to be on the panel. We've got about 11 people that are doing some pretty good things with cyber, but I see Zero Trust as the Fosbury flop and it's not the Zero Trust flop. Don't say that, but it's the Fosbury flop to me of of cybersecurity. One of my favorite quotes: "When the environment around a task changes, a new and better way to do things is usually possible." And that's what happened with the Fosbury flop. If you know the high jump, people went to basically going back first, and they could have never done that in the previous environment, which was they were jumping onto sand or sawdust. When the environment changed, when there was foam that they were able to jump on, it enabled new things to be done, and I believe that's what we're experiencing now in the cyber world. The environment, the remote environment, all the things that we're going through right now are causing a lot of changes. And if we don't react, if we don't respond to those changes, we're in big trouble. So I look forward to talking and sharing and appreciate you guys making time for me.
All right. Well, Tim, thanks for joining us virtually. Don't go away because I have a quick follow-up for you. When it comes to, because since we look at your title and say Cybersecurity Learning Director, talk maybe just a little bit, take a couple minutes and talk about how the education of cyber workforce, cyber workers has changed over the last 3 to 5 years. What is different today than maybe was previously in terms of how you think about or how you go about educating the workforce?
That's a really good question. Actually, when I started for Defense Acquisition University back in 2006, and as an intermittent type thing, when I started talking about at the time information assurance, there was very little, very little understanding of what was going on, to be honest. Yeah, we kind of did some of that. We gave it to the contractors, but the DoD itself was really, at least there wasn't a whole lot of expectations from DAU standpoint to do training in that area. And I got to tell you, over the last 4 or 5 years, I would probably not be hired, to fill one of the slots on our team because the level of training we've got 3 or 4 people with doctorates. We've got a lot of people that are doing really some really good things in cybersecurity. So the level of training, just the level of expertise from the government side of things has gone up a great deal.
All right, appreciate it. Tom from CBP, tell us something we don't know.
Hello. All right, thank you for having me. So CBP was mentioned a couple times already because we are a large organization. We bring a lot of data from all over the place. And one of my primary concerns is protecting that data and making sure that it's secure. One of the biggest things that I've worked with is brilliance in the basics when it comes to cybersecurity. A lot of the things that we've seen in recent years have been small misconfigurations or things that have been overlooked that adversaries have been able to take advantage of and compromise. So how do we make sure that we are integrating that brilliance in the basics early on within our programs, within our information systems? One of the things that we've been doing to focus on that is integrating with the acquisition lifecycle. So as our program managers identify areas that they're interested in procuring, before they're able to move through that process, we start working with them from a cyber perspective. We start looking at the supply chain and where they have different ties. If they are working with trusted providers, what does the actual end state look like for what they're designing? We want to understand that before they purchase it, so we're not building the plane as they're flying, as It's been said before. But what we're doing is we're integrating cyber early on into the life cycle for these programs so that when they are mature, they are secure. And that way, we're able to protect that data and make sure that it's usable for the agents and meets that mission need in the end.
All right, so great point about the acquisition, and you're the first one that brings it up. So that is something we've been talking about for years, build it in, don't bolt it on. How's it actually happening? Give me maybe an example. Hey, we wanted to buy this new widget, and here's the process we went through so the widget was secure from the beginning, versus we talked a lot about how we got to make it secure, and then in the end, we bolted something on.
Yeah, absolutely. So from the department level, they came down with some requirements. We took those and made them our own for CBP because we wanted the process to work for CBP. What we do is we request documentation so that we understand what they're looking at, regardless of what it is, and then start looking where we can apply those cyber integrations. That way, when they get to the portion when they are acquiring, they have a roadmap for these are the cybersecurity requirements that you need to meet from either a FIPS 199 perspective, so they're meeting those minimum requirements from FISMA, or these are the requirements that you need to meet for whatever the purchase that they're looking at is. We really start, and we have gate reviews that they're required to have documentation signed off by our CISO to actually confirm that they've met those requirements before they're able to move forward through the acquisition lifecycle.
All right, I have about 100 more questions for you, but we still have one more panelist. So Jared from the FBI, tell us something we don't know.
Check, mic check, 1, 2. So, well, first, not to reference someone who's no longer here, but if anyone needs help translating Southern English, originally from Houston, so I may be able to help. But something you may not know may be the degree in which collaboration occurs at the Bureau, and I won't talk too long about that, but just my experience in a JDA out at the NSA with Cybercom, which was referenced earlier. They have a team called the Operations Enabling Cell, and it's really impressive to see the degree in which there is cybersecurity collaboration across the government with private sector partners, with international partners, et cetera. But in general, as far as challenges is concerned, being from law enforcement, being from the FBI side of the house, I just feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't reference public trust as a continuing problem that we deal with. I think the Bureau, other law enforcement agencies do an excellent job at getting out there and marketing the mission and reassuring concerns, et cetera, but it wasn't until recently that I gained a new appreciation for that particular issue. Prior, I'd been in enterprise defense, so trust was all about developing relationships with vendors, making sure that these are the tools that we need, developing trust with leadership, expressing to them this is a cyber threat, it is that serious, we do need these fundings to help protect the enterprise. But then on the forward operating perspective, incident response, it's a difficult job, and it's understandable on both sides of the fence as far as coming into a business, and we talked about this earlier, noting that we're not here to take down your servers, we're not here to pass your information on to regulators, we're here to support the victim. You're a victim of a cyber attack. So helping spread that message with all of you here, the companies that you guys work with and represent, the different law enforcement agencies, it's a continuing challenge, and it's something that we try to keep top of mind.
All right, so we're going to get to your questions in a second. I have my follow-up for Jared, of course. I'm going to go back to the collaboration piece, even though you were like, I won't spend too much time on it, but I will.
Yeah.
It's the beauty of I get the microphone. So for years, we've heard it's a one-way street. Oh, the government takes, they don't ever give. That's changed, I think, over the last, again, I'll always go 3 to 5 years. Where have you seen the big change in terms of the two-way sharing? We know strong majority of all the threats are seen by the private sector before they are seen by the government. At the same time, how's the government sharing back? Just talk a little bit more about what you've seen the differences and why do you think the differences have come about?
Sure. I mean, I think that there's been, ever since 9/11 and conversations about FBI sharing information with CIA and vice versa, there's sort of been a spotlight on that particular issue. I will say just, the nature of the different authorities involved across different government agencies, the nature and the different missions, you're always going to have that issue. So, this idea that it's gone away or that it's, meaningfully evaporated is not entirely accurate. There still are legitimate issues surrounding sharing information. We heard earlier again about the different authorities, the classified information, so on and so forth. But there has been a concerted effort on that issue, and I'll just bring up my JDA, Joint Duty Assignment again, wherein after they stood up the ICC, the Integrated Cyber Center at NSA, and now you see the IC and NSA and US Cybercom, the DoD working together. As that relationship matured and they ironed out the different policy agreements that needed to happen in order to share information, identified what information could be shared, then you saw other agencies being pulled into the fray, the other IC agencies, law enforcement agencies. And so, you know, at the OEC, the Operation Enabling Center, a team out there at the ICC, you have members from the FBI. When I was there, there are members from Cyber Division, Enterprise Cybersecurity. There's members from DHS, CISA, US CERT, all sharing information about what they're seeing on their networks and working with leadership to finalize and understand the authorities and the policies and all that mire that exists. But, you know, explicit efforts like that, I think, are what's needed and what's happening to help change that.
All right. If anyone else from the panel wants to jump on that question as well about sharing more broadly, then we'll go to the audience questions. So if anyone has a question, there we go. So you start with that, and I'll walk over this one.
I want to build, because it actually, I think it's a nice circle to what I was talking about, which are the rules. How do we get into a room so that we can all talk about what we need to see, want to do with data, what data is available? And this is where I think some of the technology can come into play. If I can set up an environment that says, hey, financial services sector, here are 17 cases that all have a financial nexus. Do these trigger anything in your space? I don't want details. I don't want access to your system. But if they do, now I can have a protocol for how we actually have that conversation. So it's a little more focused, but if we can't do let's put tags on data, let's make our architecture secure, let's create these virtual rooms, which all goes into the technology that the vendors are developing. How do we create that environment that meets these specific requirements?
I think, Jared, with you mentioning public trust and the FBI and getting more information out, when you saw back in the 2020 elections where the FBI was working with Facebook and Twitter and all these different other organizations, social media organizations, to try and help with misinformation and disinformation and foreign malign influence and deep fakes and all that kind of stuff, that it created case law, which is now codified by the Supreme Court, where the Bureau is allowed to now share with and collaborate with social media organizations to try and help make sure that we're hardening the target by making sure that we're getting the right information to the right people, the public, the general public. So there are efforts in that way that have been pushed back against by certain folks, and have now, I think, as we move forward, will be better. And you know, back to the attribution of Iran, that's an example of the government sharing information. That's very timely information, and there's a deliberate reason why the FBI and why the IC did that. I'm no longer there, but I'm speaking about this from an outsider's perspective. They're trying to make the public aware of this is going to happen, this has happened, and this is the who. So we've got to be all cognizant of that, and I think that's an example of sharing information.
All right, we have a question. My mic. I know, but it's my mic.
Oh, okay. All right. First of all, Jared, I began my career at NSA, and with all due respect, at NSA, I was in the Middle East division, but as far as the languages and dialects are concerned, Texas wasn't Southern. Texas was its own dialect, and you're doing what Texans always do, covering everything, and then there was North and South and East and West dialects. So let's be clear about that.
Yeah, I'm behind enemy lines, so I agree with everything you have to say.
Okay, all right. So culture aside, and culture is always a very big issue, I'm curious, since we got you all together here on this one panel, what continue to be your biggest frustrations in your daily, weekly, monthly, yearly jobs, and what can industry do to help that, including what are your biggest frustrations with industry?
Okay, we only have like 20 minutes left. So everyone gets to answer one of those questions or no, none.
Your copay.
Your copay.
I'll take 19 of those minutes. No, so from TSA's perspective, some of the biggest frustrations that we have from industry, and it's kind of a frustration that we've kind of put ourselves in the bind with, and it's the FedRAMP process. And I see a lot of head nod, even Heather over here just kind of, sighed a little bit. We've put ourselves in this bind to say cloud has to be FedRAMP for government use, but does it always have to be, right? Can we come up with a methodology that says certain data types or certain use cases don't require FedRAMP? And can government agencies also take on some of the responsibilities to evaluate the cloud infrastructures in a way? So that's been the biggest headache, because we see a lot of times some agencies will accept the risk of using a certain cloud platform or certain technology without the FedRAMP, but then other agencies won't. And there's no unified voice that says this is acceptable with FedRAMP, this is acceptable without. And unless we kind of come up with that platform or a plan for that, we're always going to hit this wall where it's up to the risk tolerance of the authorizing official or the agency as to what they'll accept, and we might miss out on some pretty interesting technology. Another frustration that I'll just kind of briefly think is cross collaboration as far as accepting other authority to operates, right? Reciprocity with the accreditation process. So, and TSA is about to have our first real reciprocity with that authority to operate with ICE. There's a body-worn camera where ICE has gone through the ATO process. They've accepted a cloud infrastructure for the uses of body-worn cameras, and TSA, based on DHS's orders, has to adopt a body-worn camera for our field officers. And so we're now going through the process. Instead of recreating the wheel, we're doing the R&D approach, rip off and duplicate, where we're just going to take what ICE did and say, great, you've got all the work. We're going to just kind of do a quick double check, make sure we're happy with it. And now we can use the same platform you're using, rather than duplicate the platform and recreate the wheel and spend extra government funding where it's already been done. So hopefully we can kind of cross-pollinate in that manner.
All right, but let me interrupt before anyone else jumps in. What's that going to save you in terms of time, cost, money? Any idea that's going to take us from months to days to weeks to hours?
It probably takes us, so the average life cycle that we could tell people for an authority to operate is about 9 months, between 9 to 10 months on a good ATO cycle. This, we're talking about a month. The package has actually just I would say about 3 months in total, because we kind of, from the moment we started talking about it, sometime next month, I believe, is when we're going to finally go through, and it's about 3 months now. So you went from a 12-month cycle with technology specialists that are both going to do the technical evaluation, the build up, the governance, risk, and evaluation, down to let me see what your paperwork has. Is it good? Great, we'll sign off on it. Now we start using it.
Anyone else want to pick up on Mark's? Nobody
So
wants to.
if I could,
Yep,
yes, I wanted to just say, my biggest frustration has got to be in, oh gosh, just sorry, my biggest frustration is not necessarily FedRAMP, but it's similar to that, and it's any policy that we have. The DoD keeps on putting out policy and putting out policy, and most of those things are done by some really good people, and they understand what they're doing. But you've got either, and it's really more government than contractors, to be quite honest. But you have people that are like, tell me the very minimum I have to do, the very minimum, and I'll do it. And it's like, if you're doing that, you've already lost the game. You've got to go much beyond policy. You've got to go beyond what really is going to protect my system. What do I need to do? What steps do I need to take? And I've seen, we have the risk management framework. I've seen RMF programs that got an ATO with no problem, but they haven't gone very far because they're really not secure. And it's not because the RMF is bad. It's because the threats are changing so often and everything else that if you just have a compliance mentality, you're dead.
A comment. It's still my mic.
I can't hold the mic. I forgot about that. Adam, we are working with Eric Mill, who's the cloud portfolio manager at GSA, on how do we improve FedRAMP. You brought up all these points. I think they're open to it. They just have they don't have the acting. They just hired a full-time person, broken by Jason Miller, I think, right?
I fixed it
You fixed it?
when news breaks.
Yes, he ran that. So we'll definitely like to include you in that conversation. I thought all your points are great. I think they're willing to, bring everybody in. Let's go fix the problems. Let's put out some guidance, whatever we have to do to make FedRAMP better. At least that's what they're coming to us with.
All right, another question from the audience. All right. There we go. The maybe I'll do it. All right, that's a good one. I'm sure you'll have a good one. All right, tell me who you are. My mic. My mic.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, it's still in the morning. Yeah, my question is to Heather. She would like to have a real-time data. And believe it or not, there is no way you can have real-time data. What are you gonna do about it?
There's no way you can do it.
So building actually partially on what Tim was saying that feeds into it, we have to be careful with terminology. I know there's no real-time data and there's always time delays. And, if nothing else, some of the stuff we receive, we have to translate, and that throws a glitch into things. We do what's good enough. There's a story that good enough for the government used to be a standard of excellence. And yet we've reached a point where I would say it's not. It's whatever is the minimum I have to do. And there are a number of reasons. I would love to be fully compliant to maybe not 100%, but to 60% or 70%. I can't. I don't have the budget. I don't have a committed, sustained budget. And I see some of the vendors I talk to regularly who have heard this spiel from me. If I can't make the technology updates and upgrades to the system I have in a continuous, predictable way, then I will never be able to do more than the minimum. Now, this is frustrating when we talk about some of the scenarios that law enforcement faces. The bad guy's on an airplane going to land at Dulles in half an hour, and if we can't get the information from party A to party B in a timely manner, that person walks into our country. If we can't get information to a law enforcement entity in another country that somebody's about to do permanent physical harm to themselves or somebody else, then someone might die simply because we couldn't get data from point A to point B. So yes, we have to be careful with the language we use. We're going to do as much as we can with the resources we have. We're going to try to expand the mission and the communication as much as technology will allow us, understanding that it will never be as much or to the level that we want.
And let's maybe pull that. Maybe Tom or Jared jump in on this idea of data and how that's kind of directing or helping you make decisions. What are you doing around analytics? What are you doing around kind of using that real time, as near real time, to drive cyber changes or updates?
Yeah, so real time, I prefer to use semi-real time, right? Because it's always got that delay in it, but trying to get there is always the challenge because there are roadblocks, and it's not always technology that's the roadblock. We run into a lot of political issues across the government where we can't share the data, or there's roadblocks that prevent us from sharing it in a timely fashion. We've seen that throughout history. So it's not something that's uncommon. What we need to look at is ways that we can get over those roadblocks and cross those hurdles to enable that semi-real time. So interconnections between our databases, interconnections between our technologies with those overlapping agreements saying that this is the data that we're allowed to share, this is segregated to this is only what's being shared, and then enable that semi-real time information sharing so that we can get it to the right people that need it to take action when it's needed.
Sure. So, I mean, I would just ditto most of what was just, not to bring up the same example again, but, fusion centers, stuff like that, I think is, again, efforts that are ongoing to increase, et cetera, that really help with the goal of, I guess, real-time data, just like the goal of perfection is not really realistic, but that's what you're shooting for. But like they said, near real-time data, being able to sit, for example, physically next to someone at CISA who has access to the Einstein system, and they can say, we just saw this IOC at this agency. It wasn't a part of our IOC for our SIM, et cetera, and I can make that connection, again, near real time. So having those interactions and formalizing that, I think, helps a lot.
I got one here. And I know we don't have anyone from CISA on the panel, but I know probably Edom and Tom could maybe talk another time about this. Is the CDM dashboard. People love to hate it, hate to love it, but there is a lot of data that's being shared that's actually making a difference. And I think you see that with the updates to ability to stay in front of some of the threats that we're seeing that's hitting some other areas. We have another question. Tell them who you are.
Yeah, good morning. Kyle Thomas from Appian. I've heard budget constraints come up. It's always a present problem, no matter what government agency you're talking to. And it strikes me that we have an opportunity here to find solutions that work or are working well in one agency that does a similar thing that your agency is doing, and maybe take that working solution or most of that working solution and import it into your own agency. I'm wondering how you view that. Have you done that? Are you looking to do that? And maybe what venues you would look to be able to take, say, a solution from a partner agency and walk it over into your shop?
So thanks for the question, because it is a wonderful thing that I wish we could do better at using. For example, the project my team is working on is a deployment of Salesforce. This is not a new technology. This is not a new solution. We're not even doing anything really unique in how we're deploying it. So what I would ask of vendors is the more easily you make the product where I can use it out of the box, most helpful. The next part is looking to see how we can ensure the communication across agencies. So sticking with Salesforce, they do a wonderful public sector event where people demonstrate, how they're using the tool. The challenge that I now face is finding the time to attend the session and the entire session so that I can have that full conversation with names so that I can say, hey, you're doing 90% of what I need to do. Can I talk to you? Can my engineers talk to your engineers? Totally open to it, but it's how do I find that person, knock on that door, get that address? Now, I will say, I love vendors. You guys are great information sources, and you also help us make some of those connections, but sometimes there's a nuance that I don't even know exists in my system, so I can't tell you, so you can't figure out who from your Rolodex can help. But totally open to, what did you say? It's plagiarize with pride, but what was yours?
R&D, rip off and
Rip off and yeah,
duplicate.
duplicate. Totally in favor of it.
So to answer a little further with that one is, out of the box, kind of what Heather was saying, is really important, because why do I need to know that a security feature exists and enable it if it's already there? Can't it come by default? Can it be secured by default instead of finding out later on, having a vendor, we've deployed a product, and it later on to say, oh, did you not enable this feature that helped secure your solution even better? Oh, thanks for telling me a year later, now that it's been deployed and I've had it for a year. That mentality of secure by design, yes, you may have, a product may have security features in place, but if it's not enabled out of the box, if it requires prior knowledge of the solution to say, oh, let me know every single little box to check before it's hardened, that's the problem. And that's the problem we run into when we're talking about collaboration across agencies, because I can use the product from ICE as an example for the body-worn camera. I'm going in to make sure they've hardened it to what our standards would be, because a lot of times we're using the same products. But at TSA, our shop is kind of going almost not above and beyond, but a little crazy sometimes with the security of it, saying it has to be hardened down, extremely difficult, extremely secure. Wow, my voice just cracked there. Extremely secure compared to what maybe CBP might be happy with. They might say, oh, I'm not too worried about this, so I'm not going to harden that piece. But for TSA, it's important. So if everything was kind of at a flat line, baseline of secure, then it could be easier to take it and move it from one agency to the other, knowing that it's secure by design.
The only caveat to that is the architecture, right? The underlying architecture is really what the long pole in the tent is there, because as you mentioned, like something that works for them might work really well, but then when we lift and shift over to CBP, it just doesn't work because we need to have a completely different configuration based on our underlying architecture. So it's really understanding what that looks like and building it to that highest level to where you can drop it in any environment.
All right. Another question. Tell them who you are.
Jim Cariglio from IBM. As for semi-instant response or access to data, there's an example that I'm aware of that works, and that is if we get pulled over by a local police officer for speeding, when he or she goes back to their cruiser and wants to find out who we are, that there's 700,000 police officers out locally today. They access or communicate with the FBI in sub-second response time. So if that can be a model for other exchanges of information, I think that would be very effective.
I definitely agree. I mean, there's ideas in relation to an incident occurs and a company discovers through, you know, a law enforcement agency they're working with, or, you know, a vendor that they've contracted to do their incident response. They find an IOC, for example, being able to, like you said, contact law enforcement in such a way that that information is immediately provided and it can be checked against a database of known compromises, et cetera, et cetera. Putting that to scale, I just think, you know, for cybersecurity and all that jazz, there's a lot of complexities involved, but there certainly are smart people thinking about stuff like that. I would agree, yeah.
And Peter, let me ask you, just to draw you back in the conversation, part of this is going back to the points of real world time. There's an insider threat piece here as you talk about the people side of it. Hey, Jason has a problem in his personal life. How's that bleed into his professional life? Or, hey, why is Jason downloading so much data? That seems weird. We should talk to him about it. How does that play into that same kind of idea of near real time data and driving the decisions or questions?
It's a real problem because we give someone a top secret clearance, and that doesn't mean they have access to the 7th floor of every organization that has top secret clearance information. We have to compartment that information because of that need to know principle, and that in and of itself is a roadblock to information sharing. But we're worried about, if I'm working Cuban counterintelligence, I don't need to know about Russian counterintelligence sensitive operations. How do we compartment that information? How do we ensure that the right people that have that need to know get access to that data and to inform them and enrich whatever thing that they're looking at? That is a huge problem with the intelligence community, with classified information, and a struggle that we will continue with. Teixeira had no business reading the data that he was responsible for making sure it continued along its stream. He was fishing, and when he really he should be just maintaining the creek that was, you know, the information was flowing to. So the fact that he's diving in and starting to look at things, that was a problem, and there are other folks that are probably doing the same thing that we've got to, from an insider threat, look at, but understand that maybe they're not stealing and providing to Discord and other kind of avenues. It's a challenge. It's a really big challenge, and will continue to challenge us. You know, the insider threat's been around since Cain versus Abel. Jesus himself had to worry about one of his 12. So, you know, this is not going away. I don't care how modernized we get with technology. This is going to be, the insider threat part of this is going to be an issue for forever.
Just a quick follow-up before you put your microphone down. Is it getting better in terms of the data, understanding how to compartmentalize that issue? The fact that, you know, Tom should see certain things and Jared should see other things, or is it, how much progress have you seen the agencies make in terms of addressing that challenge? And then we'll get to another question.
I don't know if I'm a good person to evaluate that. I mean, I think we still see cases that rise to the level of a high profile Washington Post litmus Federal News Network.
It's okay.
Right? So, you know, the cases continue, so I don't think we're getting where we need to be, frankly.
Okay, we have another question. Tell them who you are.
Yeah, Mike Call with Smarttronics, and you kind of started going down this road right now. So pre 9/11, we knew there were lots of silos. Post 9/11, it swung over to the right, and then there were less silos. And then over time, I'm a retired DEA agent, and I saw it kind of going back the other way into the silos again. So what are your biggest concerns about or biggest silos that you see today that need to be relooked at and maybe broken down a bit?
Anyone on the panel?
I can take that if you don't mind. First of all, I think it goes back into what we've already mentioned, and everybody here's done such a good job going through some things about engineering and really talking about the whole insider threat type thing. Really, cybersecurity is at the very core about engineering. And, we have ransomware attacks. And why do we have them? Because people can get into our systems and they can move without really being challenged. So, as you look into all of those things, you really got to ask yourself, how am I, you know, again, that first part is designing the system. But what check, whether it's zero trust or not, what checks am I putting in place? Because the bottom line is I am being breached, and I guess the biggest silo I see from all that is, we just have this compliance mentality that, yeah, we get the compliance and we're done, and it goes across the whole organization sometimes, and we're never done. We've got to continually be evaluating. We've got to be looking at our engineering and on our system, and just to understand that, we talk about what keeps you up at night and those type of things. I don't think that our adversaries are saying that. I think they love to stay up all hours of the day because they're finding vulnerabilities and they're finding ways to get in. And the silos of issues that we have, really, I think beginning in with not fully understanding what engineering is all about from a cyber standpoint.
The second thing there is it's a cultural shift, right? We saw it after 9/11. It started to shift, but people are set in their ways. We have databases that are accessible for law enforcement agencies. We have IOC collections that are accessible through CISA. We have Joint Task Force, but it's enabling the collaboration at the lower levels and at the higher levels of the organization. So the information trickles down and they know who to talk to and where to put the information when it needs to get there. So just because it's available in this database doesn't mean that the person that needs it knows that it's there or how to get to it. So it's continuing that collaboration and shifting that culture into a culture of collaboration, information sharing, so that it can continue to grow.
All right, so I'm going to ask the follow-up. Tell me how you're doing that.
So we actually have a program for trusted partner initiative from our CIO, who you'll hear from later today. So that's one of his initiatives that he has put in place, and we work through them to enhance our collaboration and enhance our relationships with internal to CBP and external organizations, so that we foster that collaboration and help to break down some of those silos, identify where they exist, and continue that collaboration.
So to kind of also answer the bit of more of that question is a matter of trust, right? The silos are there because sometimes we don't trust where the data might be going to. So you kind of get into a supply chain risk concern. Supply chain risk isn't just a vendor problem, it's also agency problem. We're sharing data across agencies, that's a supply chain. We're receiving data, they're a supplier of data, right? So that supply chain risk is also a factor for helping break it out of silos, which hopefully the concept of the zero trust framework, once a lot of these federal agencies starts to adopt and push towards what the CISIS model is for zero trust, now I can look at an agency and go, got it, I know where you stand on security. I know where you stand on the level of security comparison to my own organization. I can now confidently share my data with you, knowing that it's going to be secured and hardened to the same levels that I would. So that, I think, will help break down the silos going forward.
All right, we have another question. Tell them. Oh, go ahead. I went over here. Tell them who you are.
Hi, I'm Rodney from GI Forum. little company you've never heard of, but you just did. So I grew up, my mom's from Alabama, my dad's from Michigan, so I grew up bilingual. I'm going to put away half of my vocabulary to ask this question in Yankee, and I'll explain it to the guy from Houston later. So, real story, take this back to FedRAMP. Just worked with a company who spent about $1 million to FedRAMP their cloud-based product. This particular product is not particularly sensitive. Video creation platform people use for training. In doing so, they took away about half of their functionality and doubled their license price. And we now call that for government. So the reason you're doing this is an OMB memo from 2011 that backed up a FISMA memo from 2002. So we're talking over a decade. And you all, with the fast advances in AI and cloud computing, have to use FedRAMP for cloud-based products. So you have data that you didn't originate. You want to analyze it in real time using AI that you can't afford. And that's in a cloud-based environment. From a political standpoint, they all say, my CIO won't let me use this. From a political standpoint, what can you do to overcome those challenges so you can get to the data you need?
Who wants the hot potato? So let's, do you want to jump in? Go ahead.
I'll
Jump in
give
the
it
fray.
a quick whirl, and the answer is just education on risk tolerance. I think that's kind of what it boils down to. Helping the CIO understand what is the risk they're accepting by not going with a FedRAMP product and what is the risks they're eliminating by going with a FedRAMP product. If we can come up with a good baseline for that, I think we can work towards having products that aren't always needing to be FedRAMPed. And I think that's the easy answer that I can give without getting in trouble.
All right, so a couple things just to touch upon is new memo's out. So yay to updated memo. And then that just is a couple, maybe a month ago. And obviously FedRAMP is, I'm not defending them, but as someone who covers it quite closely, they're hearing your complaints. Whether they do something that you like or don't like or are successful is yet to be seen. But so Tom, more people to come to your FedRAMP event. All right, you have a question, tell them who you are.
Yep. Casey Corliss with Rubrik. So thank you all for answering these questions. So pulling on the earlier themes about the external and internal threats and zero trust, what are your agencies doing and thinking about when it comes to recovery instead of prevention?
So it's been a minute since, well, a few years since I've been on the enterprise cybersecurity side, CND, but Cyber Division is still very much involved with that side of the house at the FBI. And I mean, your typical answers would be there. There's been an increase in high quality tabletop exercises, so yearly tabletop exercises, conversations on how to improve those efforts, conversations on which tabletop exercises across the government, because there's a few that are held that make sense to participate in. Constant revisions and emphasis and, you know, preaching of the importance of a high quality incident response plan, noting that, you know, serious revisions or reviews need to happen on a yearly basis with the changes in technology. So your standard answers there, like I said, you know, an OCIO that's empowered, that's authorized. I know back in the day we had some structural issues wherein, you know, we have your policy maker, but they don't really have an enforcement arm within the organization. They can tell you, you know, don't bring your phone to this country, but if the employee does, they can't really do anything about it. So tightening up the policies around those things, you know, exercises, training, all that jazz.
And Tom, we're just about out of time, but let me just ask you the same question. How much of the discussion has changed from, hey, we got to prevent, which is very hard, to we have to be able to be resilient? I hear a ton about resiliency.
Yeah, that's something my group has taken a long, hard look at. And what we do is we assess our information systems for that. We look at the resilience and we're looking at their business impact assessments and, you know, their time to recover, what they're doing for backups, and then identifying, do they fit within the business needs, right? If they don't, then we provide them the recommendations on how to move forward and put those into a place where if they do suffer from an incident, they'll be able to recover to a point where they can still be operational and we won't be down for a prolonged period of time.
We're 8 minutes over, but go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, if I could say too, we've touched on it a lot. It's all about the changing of the culture. I think that's happening in some ways, but how do you change a culture? And I really think it comes to celebrating successes a lot of times. And you know, the nice thing about it's not just zero trust; it's the zero trust principles of understanding. You know, you've already been breached. If you start enacting some of those things, you start measuring it, which measurement is something we haven't fully talked about either. But if you measure what you're doing and you say, hey, here's where we were 6 months ago, here's where we are now, we celebrate those wins. I think we can truly make some changes and start seeing some cultural change. But we've got to have some very, very concerted efforts to do that, and it's not going to come overnight.
Wins. It's hard in cybersecurity, isn't it, sometimes? Nobody wants to talk about the successes or the failures. All right, let's give the panelists a round of applause. They did an excellent job. Thank you as well for being a great audience participating. Tom, I'm going to hand it over to you. You tell us what's next. Thank you all very much.